My name is Sky, and this is my story of how I discovered what family truly means when money enters the equation. From the earliest days I can remember, I understood there was no place for me in this house. When my brother scored dead last in his class, my parents would not utter a word of criticism or correction. Yet when I earned first place citywide in academics, they would dismiss it with a wave of their hand, saying that education was pointless for girls anyway. The day our property settlement funds arrived, the entire family gathered around the dining table. $380,000 had been deposited, every penny of it transferred directly into my brother Joshua's bank account. Standing before all of us, my parents made their announcement with unwavering certainty. They declared that all the money would go to Joshua, warning me against any feelings of resentment, since sons were the ones who would care for them in their old age. Even my uncle could not bear to witness this injustice. He spoke up, reminding them that I too was their child, born of their own blood. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Share your advice below and subscribe to see how my story continues. And then, I made a decision that changed everything. My mother shut him down immediately with words that cut through the air like a blade, declaring that daughters who marry become water spilled on the ground, no longer belonging to their birth family. My parents seemed genuinely puzzled by any objection to their decision. They looked at me with confusion, asking what could possibly be wrong with their choice. Since I was, after all, the older sister, I remained silent and simply walked away from that table. That was the last time I ever tried to reason with them. 1 month later, my Australian permanent residency was approved. 6 months after that, Joshua had gambled away everything in the stock market, including my parents' retirement savings. They searched for me frantically, only to discover my phone had been disconnected and I had blocked them on all messaging platforms. At that very moment, I was sitting in a lawyer's office in Sydney, signing the final documents for my overseas asset management agreement. 80 million Australian dollars had just been transferred into my accounts. I understood what true family bonds really meant. The air in our house had always felt suffocating and heavy. On this particular evening, 8 dishes were arranged across the table alongside an opened bottle of red wine. My father Robert Blake personally filled glasses for my mother Patricia Blake, my brother Joshua Blake, and my uncle. Only I sat before a simple bowl of white rice. Patricia cleared her throat, her face glowing with barely contained excitement. She announced that they had gathered everyone together to share wonderful news. Joshua, 24 years old, sat beside her grinning like a child of 3, his smile stretching from ear to ear. My uncle raised his wine glass toward my father. He asked if the settlement money had finally arrived, noting the celebratory atmosphere. Robert chuckled and rubbed his hands together nervously, glancing toward my mother. In our household, Patricia's word was law. Patricia clinked her glass against my uncle's, producing a crisp, clear sound. She confirmed his guess, explaining that the money had been deposited that very day. $380,000 exactly as promised. The kitchen lights seemed to brighten at the mention of that sum. My uncle nodded approvingly, suggesting that with both Sky and Joshua now adults, the money could be divided to help secure both their futures in marriage. He looked toward me with hopeful eyes. I continued eating my rice in silence. Patricia's smile faded slightly as she set down her wineglass, her voice rising several octaves. She questioned her brother's assumption, explaining that I was merely a daughter they had raised out of duty, destined to marry into another family like water poured onto the ground. In her view, the money had absolutely nothing to do with me. The room fell into immediate, heavy silence. Robert's head sank even lower, nearly disappearing into his wineglass. My uncle's expression changed instantly. He slammed his glass onto the table, demanding to know how Patricia could speak such words. He reminded her that I was her own child, asking what made me inferior to Joshua. Patricia's voice grew even sharper as she insisted that I could never compare to her son. She had given birth to Joshua to continue the family line and ensure care in old age. The $380,000 represented their investment in their son's future and their own security. She announced that every penny had already been transferred to Joshua's account, warning me against any jealousy since this was simply how things should be. Her final words were directed straight at me. I raised my head to meet her gaze. I felt no jealousy, only a sensation as if someone had reached into my chest, squeezed my heart in their fist, and plunged it into ice water. The previous month, I had won first place in the citywide speech competition, earning $5,000 in prize money. When I handed the check to Patricia, she stuffed it carelessly into her pocket before rushing to the kitchen to prepare Joshua's favorite braised pork. The month before that, Joshua had scored at the very bottom of his class on final examinations. Rather than criticizing him, Patricia comforted him, explaining that test scores meant nothing compared to happiness, then took him shopping for the latest smartphone model. I had always known there was no place for me in this family. What I had not expected was how they would make this reality so thunderously, devastatingly clear with $380,000. Joshua finally spoke, swinging his legs smugly while refusing to even glance in my direction. He addressed our uncle with false confidence, suggesting that I was so capable of earning money on my own, that such a small amount meant nothing to me. The way he called me sister sounded both artificial and grating. I ignored him, returning my attention to Patricia's face. I quietly repeated words she had spoken countless times before, asking what use my education had been. She seemed startled that I would challenge her. Then her face flushed with the anger of someone who felt personally attacked. She declared that my education truly was useless. She made it absolutely clear that I had no claim to any portion of that money. My uncle stood up in frustration, calling her completely unreasonable. Patricia also rose to her feet, pointing directly at my nose as she explained that as the older sister, I should naturally defer to my brother and contribute to the family. She asked why this should not be expected of me. I studied her flushed face, my silent father, and my brother who watched the scene with obvious entertainment. Suddenly, I felt utterly weary of it all. I set down my chopsticks and stood up, announcing simply that I had finished eating. Without another word, I turned and went to my room. That was the last time in that house that I ever attempted to engage them in reasonable discussion. My bedroom measured just 6 square meters, containing only a bed, a wardrobe, and a desk. The window faced the residential complex's garbage transfer station, which filled summer air with sour, rotting odors. Joshua's room was twice the size of mine, facing south with its own balcony. I closed the door, shutting out the sounds of my uncle and mother's continued argument. From the bottom drawer of my desk, I retrieved an old mobile phone. When I powered it on, signal lights blinked and the screen illuminated. Though it contained no phone card, I connected to the Wi-Fi network and found an encrypted email notification waiting. The sender was David, my Australian immigration attorney. The message was brief and direct. He congratulated me on the approval of my skilled worker visa, explaining that official documentation had been sent to my secure email address and I could enter Australia at any time. He also mentioned that the final version of my asset management agreement was ready for signature. I turned off the old phone and retrieved a new phone card from a hidden compartment in the drawer. After switching cards, I activated my new device. The screen displayed a photograph of Australia's Gold Coast, showing endless blue sky meeting equally blue ocean under brilliant sunshine. I dialed David's number. When he answered, his voice carried its usual energy and enthusiasm as he congratulated me on the visa approval. I informed him that I had reviewed the agreement and found everything acceptable. I was prepared to provide online authorization for immediate execution. After a brief pause, David asked if I was absolutely certain, reminding me that once executed, the process could not be reversed. I confirmed my decision without hesitation. The silence on his end lasted several seconds before David spoke softly, asking if I had truly considered everything carefully. He pointed out that this would sever my final connection to my home country. I looked out the window at the dark night and the dim yellow lights illuminating the garbage station. Memories flooded back. I remembered being 5 years old when Joshua snatched away my doll. When I cried, Patricia slapped me, scolding me for not yielding to my younger brother. I recalled being 10 when I earned first place school-wide in academics. Robert had promised to take me to Disneyland, but when Joshua insisted on going fishing instead, they took him and left me home to study. When I turned 15, my grandmother secretly gave me $20,000, telling me to buy something nice for myself. When Patricia discovered this, she forced me to surrender the money, claiming they needed it for Joshua's tutoring fees. I refused to give up that money. It was my first act of rebellion. I was beaten and locked in my room without food for 2 days, but I kept those $20,000. From that day forward, I knew I could depend on no one. That money became my seed capital. I used it to purchase my first stock. Later, when almost no one had heard of cryptocurrency, I converted all my profits into 500 bitcoins. Then, just before technology stocks soared, I sold everything and invested in a different market entirely. I had never formally studied finance, but I memorized every financial textbook, economics principle, and investment case study I could find. During daylight hours, I remained the quiet, high-achieving daughter, the sister who endured constant exploitation. But at night, alone in that 6-square-meter room after everyone else slept, I became someone else entirely. In the digital world, I was a cold, decisive, relentlessly successful accumulator of capital. David's voice brought me back to reality, asking if I was still there. I told him I had severed all connections long ago, instructing him to proceed with execution. After ending the call, I deleted all records and threw both the old phone and card out the window into the dark garbage station below. Wind carried in the scent of decay, yet I felt I was breathing the most liberated air I had experienced in 10 years. The next morning, I rose at 6 o'clock. The living room remained in chaos from the previous evening, with leftover food still scattered across the table amid the lingering smell of alcohol. Robert lay snoring thunderously on the sofa while Patricia and Joshua's bedroom doors remained tightly closed. I entered the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, then placed $500 from my wallet in the most visible spot on the dining table. This represented my final contribution to the household, not from affection but as a transaction. I considered it payment for my final 24 hours of room and board under their roof. I wheeled a small suitcase to the front door. It contained only a few changes of clothing, a laptop computer, and all my identification documents. I left behind every award certificate and academic honor. These had once served as tools to prove my worth to my parents, but now they were merely waste paper. The early morning streets were quiet, and my taxi arrived quickly. I instructed the driver to take me to Los Angeles International Airport. He glanced at me in the rearview mirror, commenting that it seemed unusual for such a young woman to travel alone. I acknowledged his observation while gazing out the window. The city was awakening around us with towering buildings and increasing traffic flow. Though this was my birthplace, I felt no sense of nostalgia. My phone buzzed with a message from Joshua demanding that I transfer him $500 for breakfast money. His tone carried its typical sense of entitlement, as if he were issuing a command. I read the message but did not respond. Instead, I opened WhatsApp and located the group chat named Loving Family. My notifications for this group had been permanently muted. I clicked to exit the chat. Then I systematically found the profiles of Patricia, Robert, and Joshua, deleting them as contacts and blocking their phone numbers. The entire sequence felt rehearsed because I had indeed practiced it countless times in my mind. As the airplane lifted off, I felt tremendous pressure pushing me back into my seat. Through the window, I watched the familiar city below gradually shrink to a blurry dot before being completely swallowed by clouds. I leaned against my seat and closed my eyes. I felt neither sadness nor joy, only a blank emptiness like a completely erased slate. More than 10 hours later, the plane descended toward Sydney Kingsford Smith Airport. Stepping outside, I was greeted by warm air carrying the scent of sea salt. The sky was brilliantly blue with pristine white clouds. I activated my new phone to find a message waiting in my inbox from David. He welcomed me to Australia and confirmed that all asset transfers had been completed according to my instructions. All funds had been deposited into my trust fund, totaling 80 million Australian dollars. He congratulated me on beginning my new life. 80 million Australian dollars. Standing under Sydney's brilliant sunshine, I stared at the numbers on my phone screen. Finally, I understood that nothing could truly be called family affection. There existed only transactions with clearly marked prices and unequal exchanges of interests. I purchased a penthouse apartment on the Gold Coast, a modest 2,000 square foot space with a wraparound terrace. From the terrace, I could see the endless Pacific Ocean, with white sand beaches forming a golden border against the deep blue canvas. David placed the final stack of documents on the glass table before me. The papers covered my trust fund, Australian citizenship documentation, medical insurance, tax identification number, and premium credit cards from 3 banks. He announced that I was now completely and officially an Australian citizen. He handed me a sealed phone box containing a local number with maximum encryption that only he knew about. He suggested I destroy my previous phone number entirely. I informed him that I had already done so. David studied me with a complex expression containing both admiration and barely perceptible pity. He observed that I was the most coldly rational and ruthless client he had ever encountered. Executing our plan without a moment's hesitation, I secured the documents in my safe using my grandmother's birthday as the password, then explained to David that I had already died once. I had died in that 6-square-meter room, died hearing Patricia say those words about my being the older sister, died under the crushing weight of that $380,000 declaration. The person now living was someone entirely different. After David departed, I poured myself a glass of ice water and walked barefoot across the cool marble floor. The house felt large and empty. I employed no cleaning service and purchased no unnecessary furniture. I personally scrubbed every corner using the most expensive cleaning products available, polishing everything to spotless perfection. It felt like a ritual cleansing to wash away 20 years of greasy, rotten, family-related odors. I opened my laptop and connected to the internet, accessing a sophisticated monitoring system I had constructed. Through subtle digital backdoors I had previously established, I could observe portions of domestic banking data flows. I entered Joshua's identification number, and the screen displayed a series of consumption records. The first transaction showed $100,000 transferred to an individual account belonging to someone called Master Lee. The second showed $50,000 spent at a luxury automobile dealership. The third revealed $20,000 spent at a high-end shopping center. His spending pattern resembled a voracious snake consuming that enormous sum. The $380,000 had shrunk to less than $200,000 in barely half a month. Patricia and Robert appeared completely unaware or simply unconcerned. In their minds, the money rightfully belonged to Joshua, and how he spent it remained entirely his prerogative. At that same moment back in America, Patricia sat at a mahjong table, drawing a tile and triumphantly revealing her winning hand. She called for payment while her opponents congratulated her on her radiant appearance, asking if she had recently come into wealth. Patricia beamed with satisfaction. modestly describing her good fortune as minor, while crediting Joshua's success and their reliance on him for future security. When someone inquired about me and my academic achievements, Patricia's expression darkened. She dismissed the question with contempt, muttering that education meant nothing for girls, and that I was more trouble than I was worth. She refused to discuss me further, calling such talk unlucky, then urged everyone to continue playing. She remained unaware that her supposedly unlucky daughter was observing from across the Pacific Ocean, watching their family's descent into ruin. I closed the computer and stepped onto the terrace, allowing ocean breezes to lift my hair. My new phone buzzed with a message from David informing me that he had secured my admission to the local university's doctoral program in finance, with classes beginning the following week. He offered to arrange a driver and assistant. I replied with 2 words: not necessary. I needed no one. Beneath my feet lay a world worth 80 million Australian dollars. Behind me lay an enormous grave I had dug myself. I was simply waiting for them to walk into it and lie down. Another month passed and Joshua became obsessed with stock trading. Master Lee turned out to be a supposed stock guru operating in online chat groups. Daily he posted doctored screenshots of profits, using incomprehensible technical jargon to convince ordinary people that he possessed the secret to wealth. Joshua believed every word. He invested his remaining $200,000 in a stock Master Lee recommended as containing insider information. The company was a tiny, worthless enterprise whose stock price had lingered around $2 for years. Master Lee announced in the group chat that major positive news was coming, promising 10 consecutive daily price increases starting Monday morning with a target price of $20. He proclaimed this a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for financial freedom. Joshua's eyes turned red with greed. 10 consecutive price increases would transform his $200,000 into $2 million. He lost all reason. He rushed home and knelt before Patricia and Robert, declaring that their family was about to become incredibly wealthy but that he needed additional capital. He repeated Master Lee's promises with embellishment. Patricia became dizzy at the mention of $2 million, an amount she had never imagined possessing. When she asked if this was truly possible, Joshua insisted it was, showing her how other group members were preparing to risk everything following Master Lee's advice. Robert retained a shred of rationality, questioning whether such speculation was too dangerous, since stock markets offered no guaranteed profits. Joshua became furious, calling his father a coward and blaming his timidity for their family's lack of success. He demanded their savings, promising to buy them mansions and luxury cars after earning $2 million. Patricia was convinced. She persuaded Robert to trust their son just once, emphasizing the potential $2 million payoff. Ultimately, greed conquered wisdom. They withdrew their entire life savings of $50,000. Combined with Joshua's remaining funds, they had $250,000. Joshua felt this was still insufficient. Without his parents' knowledge, he borrowed an additional $100,000 through high-interest online lending platforms. He invested the total $350,000 in a single maximum risk position. Monday morning at 9:30, Joshua stared at his phone screen with a pounding heart. The stock did initially rise from $2 to $2.10, then $2.20. Joshua laughed maniacally, convinced of his genius. Patricia and Robert crowded around his phone, their faces showing nervous anticipation. However, when the stock price reached $2.21, it suddenly stopped. A massive sell order appeared on screen like a mountain, instantly crushing the price. Tens of millions of shares were dumped without warning. The stock price collapsed from $2.20 to $1.80 in 1 second, then to $1.50, then to $1. The screen glowed sickly green like poisonous jade. Joshua's laughter died in his throat. He watched helplessly as the green line plunged vertically downward with unstoppable momentum. 10 minutes later, the stock price fell below 50 cents. The company issued an emergency announcement that the chairman was under investigation for financial fraud and insider trading, and trading was immediately suspended. Suspension, those two words struck Joshua like hammer blows, shattering all his fantasies. His $350,000 investment was instantly worth less than $50,000 in frozen, unsaleable stock. Even more terrifying, his phone began vibrating frantically with debt collection calls and messages. The first message informed Joshua Blake that his $100,000 loan had matured and required immediate repayment of principal plus interest, totaling $120,000. $120,000. Patricia's eyes rolled back and she collapsed unconscious. Robert slumped in his chair, lips turning white. Unable to speak, Joshua stared at the blood-red figure on his screen like a gaping wound. Suddenly he remembered me, the sister he had mocked, ignored, and stolen everything from. He began shouting my name desperately, his voice hoarse and tearful, insisting that I would have a solution because I had always been smarter than him. He frantically demanded that someone call me immediately. With shaking hands, he located my number and dialed it. The mechanical female voice informed him that he had reached a disconnected number. Disconnected. Those words felt like ice water poured over his head. He tried again with the same result. Joshua's expression transformed from panic to savage fury. He could not believe I would dare change my number when the family faced crisis, cursing me as an ungrateful wretch for disappearing during their emergency. He opened WhatsApp to find my profile, that grey avatar he had previously ignored. He sent a message demanding $20,000 for his urgent needs. A red exclamation mark appeared beside his message indicating it had been blocked. I had blocked him entirely. Joshua's phone clattered to the floor with a shattered screen. When Patricia regained consciousness, she immediately grabbed Robert's arm and wailed about her lost life savings. She beat him while screaming blame for believing Joshua's scheme. Robert endured her blows with empty eyes like a puppet. After crying hysterically, Patricia also remembered me. Her weeping stopped abruptly as hope flickered in her eyes. She ordered Robert to contact me immediately, reasoning that I worked for a foreign company with high wages and certainly had money. She demanded that I provide funds for Joshua's debts, as if this was my natural obligation. She seemed to have forgotten how she had publicly declared that the $380,000 had nothing to do with me, or how she had called me water spilled on the ground. Now that spilled water had become her only lifeline. They frantically searched for any possible way to contact me, calling my uncle. When my uncle answered and heard Patricia's tearful explanation, he coldly informed her that he had warned them they would regret their actions. He claimed not to know my whereabouts and would not tell them even if he did. He hung up immediately. They contacted my former university advisors, professors, and classmates, receiving identical responses. Everyone claimed they had lost touch with me after graduation, had not seen recent social media updates, or thought I might have gone abroad but were not certain. They rushed to my former workplace, where the receptionist politely informed them that Sky Blake had resigned 3 months earlier, and they possessed no personal contact information for me. After an entire day of searching, they discovered nothing. I had vanished from their world as completely as if I had never existed. That night, debt collection calls came one after another, their tone shifting from polite reminders to naked threats. The callers informed Joshua that they knew his home address and his parents' workplace, warning that failure to repay by the following day would result in personal visits. Joshua cowered in his room, trembling under blankets. Patricia and Robert sat in their darkened living room in mutual silence. Despair hung over their once arrogant household like thick black fog. Suddenly Patricia remembered something and rushed into my tiny 6 square meter room. The space was completely empty, stripped of all belongings except bare furniture. Patricia searched frantically through every corner until she discovered torn paper fragments hidden beneath the bed frame. After painstaking reconstruction, she managed to piece together fragments of what appeared to be an airline itinerary. A few words remained legible: destination, Australia, Sydney. Sydney, those words struck Patricia like adrenaline injected directly into her dying heart. She scrambled to her feet, clutching the paper fragments, murky eyes blazing with renewed fire. She shrieked that I had gone to Australia as part of a long-planned scheme to steal family money and live luxuriously abroad. In her twisted logic, my departure automatically connected to the 80 million Australian dollars in my accounts, though she had no knowledge of that sum's existence. She only knew that I must have money, because only if I had money could they survive. She grabbed Robert's collar with surprising strength, demanding they immediately purchase tickets to Sydney to drag me back and force me to return their money. Robert pointed out weakly that they lacked funds for travel, and their identification documents had been confiscated by debt collectors as collateral. Patricia snarled that they would borrow money and replace their documents. She threatened that if anything happened to Joshua, she would not continue living, leaving Robert to handle the situation. The following day, Robert began his humiliating borrowing tour. First approaching his siblings, when they heard his request for money, they either claimed financial difficulties or hung up immediately. During the family's prosperous period after receiving settlement funds, they had treated these poorer relatives with contempt. Now in their crisis, no one would extend assistance. Robert approached former colleagues, who listened politely before expressing reluctance to help. They pointed out that Joshua's situation resembled gambling with borrowed money, creating a bottomless pit that no one dared attempt to fill. They questioned how a family that had received $380,000 could reach such desperation. Robert's face turned the color of liver as he struggled to explain without revealing that the money had been given entirely to Joshua and immediately lost. After a full day of effort, he managed to borrow only $3,000. When Patricia saw those crumpled bills, she slapped Robert across the face, calling him useless and pointing out that $3,000 would not even cover airfare to Sydney. Joshua emerged from his room with bloodshot eyes, reporting that debt collectors had called again, threatening to cut off his hands if payment was not received by the next day. Fear spread through the household like plague. Finally, Patricia made a decision. She declared they would sell their current resettlement apartment. This property had been allocated during the demolition process. Though small and poorly located, it represented their final shelter. When Robert asked where they would live after selling, Patricia screamed that sleeping under highway overpasses was preferable to being killed by debt collectors. They would first repay the loan, then she would travel to Sydney to find me and recover everything. The house was listed with real estate agents at a drastically reduced price for quick sale, yet attracted few potential buyers. The debt collection company's patience had clearly expired. That evening, someone spray-painted their security door with red paint reading, "Pay your debts," and blocked the keyhole with glue. For the first time, Patricia and Robert experienced complete desperation. That night, Patricia made a final decision. She gathered her mother's gold bracelets and all her gold rings and necklaces, her most treasured possessions representing her last dignity. The next morning, she and Robert went to a pawn shop where the owner weighed her jewelry and offered $28,000. Patricia's heart bled, but she took the money. Rather than using it for Joshua's debts, she went directly to the passport office. She expedited replacement documents and purchased the cheapest available red-eye flight to Sydney. The night before departure, she looked at the haggard faces of Robert and Joshua. She announced she would be gone for 1 week while they waited at home. Once she retrieved money from me, they would all be saved. Her expression resembled not a mother seeking her daughter, but a gambler pursuing prey. Patricia spent more than 10 hours cramped in economy class seating. She dared not request water from flight attendants or use the restroom, curling like a frightened hedgehog while clutching her handbag containing all her possessions, several hundred US dollars, her passport, and an old photograph of me from my student years. When the plane landed, she was pushed through the exit by passenger flow. Sydney Airport felt enormous and blindingly bright. The unfamiliar environment made her dizzy and fearful. But thoughts of me and the wealth I supposedly possessed allowed greed to overcome terror. She grabbed passing strangers, showing them my photograph and asking if they had seen me, explaining that I was her daughter named Sky and she had come to find me. A young man glanced at her strangely, shook his head, and hurried away. Undeterred, she questioned airport cleaning staff and information desk workers. No one could help. Sydney contained over 5 million people. Finding someone deliberately hiding was like searching for a needle in an ocean. Patricia wandered the airport terminal for 2 hours like a headless fly. Finally, a taxi driver working at the airport took pity on her and offered advice. He suggested she try the consulate, as government agencies might be able to access registration information for citizens abroad. The consulate. Patricia's eyes lit up again. Of course, she would seek government assistance to force me to acknowledge her as my mother. She spent $80 on a taxi to the Sydney consulate downtown. She rushed to the service window and began weeping dramatically, presenting herself as a devoted mother desperately searching for her beloved child across thousands of miles. She portrayed me as a naive, misguided young woman who had been deceived by bad influences and run away from home. Her performance was worthy of an Academy Award, drawing curious stares from bystanders as she pleaded for help finding her daughter, claiming to fear for my safety and threatening to end her own life if anything happened to her only child. A young female staff member listened patiently before asking if Patricia had any contact information or address for me in Australia. Patricia admitted she had none, asking why else she would seek official help. The worker requested my name and identification number. Patricia eagerly provided my name and domestic identification number. The staff member spent several minutes typing and searching on her computer. When she looked up, her expression had become notably distant and official. She informed Patricia that their system contained information about Sky Blake. Patricia became ecstatic, demanding to know my location immediately. The staff member shook her head, explaining this was impossible. When Patricia protested that she was my mother, the worker responded with carefully chosen words. She explained that several months earlier, Sky Blake had submitted through her attorney a legally binding personal declaration to both the consulate and Australian immigration authorities. When Patricia asked about this declaration, the worker continued methodically. The declaration explicitly stated that I did not wish any personal information to be disclosed to any family members from my home country, specifically mentioning Patricia Blake and Joshua Blake by name. The staff member paused before delivering the most devastating blow. The declaration included supporting evidence of long-term domestic abuse and unjust treatment. According to Australian privacy laws and my express wishes, they had no authority to reveal any information about me. Furthermore, I had officially received Australian permanent residency and was protected under Australian law. Patricia's face drained of all colour domestic abuse, unjust treatment. The things she considered natural and proper had become evidence I submitted to foreign governments. She wanted to make a scene and cause trouble, but in that solemn space decorated with national flags, she could not utter a single word. She was escorted out of the consulate by staff members, standing on Sydney's busy streets surrounded by traffic and towering buildings. Patricia felt for the first time that an insurmountable wall truly separated me from her. A wall built of law, money, and New World rules. The money she carried was insufficient even for the cheapest accommodation. She had no connections or support. The daughter she thought she could manipulate and exploit at will had used methods completely beyond her understanding to completely isolate her from my world. She had lost entirely and utterly. Patricia awakened from hunger. She lay in a drainage ditch beside a road in Hunter Valley, her body covered with dirt and grass debris. A wine transport truck stopped beside her. The bearded driver took pity and gave her half a bottle of water and a sandwich, then drove her to a gas station on Sydney's outskirts. She stood outside the convenience store, like a genuine beggar, watching passing vehicles and well-dressed Australians with relaxed smiles. Suddenly she felt completely out of place in this world. Gathering all her courage, she entered the store and repeatedly asked the clerk to borrow a phone for one call. The clerk felt sorry for her and handed over his mobile phone. With trembling hands, she dialed the home number she had almost forgotten. After many rings, someone answered weakly. It was Robert's voice, faint and hoarse with despair. When Robert heard her voice, he reacted as if electrically shocked. He demanded to know why she was calling and where the money was, asking if she had found me as promised. His voice carried hatred and fury. Patricia's crying stopped, replaced by deeper despair. She sobbed that everything had been false, describing her Hunter Valley experience incoherently. There had been no sky, nothing at all. The phone line fell into deadly silence. Patricia could hear Robert's labored breathing and Joshua's suppressed weeping. Robert's voice sounded like sleepwalking as he declared that everything was finished. Just then another call came through. Robert automatically answered. It was my uncle's voice, both familiar and strange, cold as ice. When Robert greeted him hopefully, my uncle immediately cut him off. He told them to stop searching and abandon their dreams. He had used connections to investigate the truth. Patricia held her breath listening to the phone. My uncle paused before delivering words like ice blocks to their hearts. He informed them that I was living very well. I had not gone into hiding or been deceived. Months earlier, I had obtained Australian permanent residency. I possessed a trust fund. After taking a deep breath, my uncle revealed the soul-crushing figure. The fund contained 80 million Australian dollars. Patricia's mind went completely blank as the phone slipped from her hands unnoticed. The convenience store clerk watched in amazement as this Chinese woman stared with wide eyes like she had seen a ghost, then collapsed backward onto the floor. On the other end of the line, in their ruined living room, Robert and Joshua also heard that number. Robert's body began trembling violently. $80 million made their $380,000 seem like loose change. Robert's voice shook uncontrollably as he asked how I had acquired such wealth. My uncle laughed coldly over the phone, explaining that the money was entirely mine. I had been investing globally since my teenage years using the small amount my grandmother had given me. I had deceived everyone in the family. Our household had never been my home, merely a hotel I had not yet found time to leave. My uncle continued like a surgical knife, precisely dissecting their final illusions. The person Patricia had encountered in Sydney who provided clues about Moonlight Manor had also been arranged by me. I had done everything deliberately. I wanted them to experience the sensation of falling from Hope's Peak into hell. I wanted to watch them be tortured to near death by their pitiful hopes. I was not hiding from them but toying with them, like a cat that catches a mouse but prefers to play with it before killing. Every word from my uncle burned into Robert and Joshua's hearts like red-hot iron. From beginning to end, they had been nothing but pawns. From the settlement money distribution to Joshua's stock market losses to Patricia's Australian journey, everything had unfolded according to the calculations of the daughter they most despised. The sister they considered spilled water. This was not misfortune or bad luck. This was a carefully planned, inescapable web of revenge. Robert's phone finally fell to the floor. He looked at Joshua, whose face still bore slap marks and reeked of urine. He surveyed their completely destroyed home and remembered my calm, emotionless departure on that final day. Finally, he understood. They had not lost $380,000. They had lost a world worth 80 million Australian dollars that could have been theirs. And the family affection they could never recover. A piercing, inhuman scream erupted from Joshua's throat. He had gone completely insane. When Patricia regained consciousness, she found herself surrounded by blinding white. The ceiling, walls, and bedding were all white, with the air filled with disinfectant odors. A masked nurse was changing her IV fluid while she remained dazed by the echoing figure of 80 million Australian dollars. She struggled to sit up but discovered her body was completely weak and her head throbbed painfully. A doctor entered and asked about her condition after seeing she had awakened. Patricia ignored his question, grabbing his white coat like a lifeline. She begged him to help her report to police that her daughter had been deceived. She claimed I possessed 80 million Australian dollars and was being controlled by a lawyer named David, demanding he rescue me immediately. In her mind, that money could not possibly represent my legitimate earnings. The only explanation was that I had become victim of a massive conspiracy, and she as my mother needed to save me and logically assume control of that wealth. The doctor looked at her with pity, explaining that they had contacted the Chinese consulate regarding her situation. Her passport and identification documents were lost, and she had no medical insurance in Australia. All medical expenses would be her personal responsibility. He indicated a bill on the bedside table showing costs for ambulance service and overnight observation totaling 7,800 Australian dollars. 7,800 Australian dollars. Patricia's eyes widened in shock. She had never experienced such expensive medical care. She shrieked that she had no money and they should seek payment from me since I possessed $80 million. The doctor shook his head and left the room without further discussion. Soon afterward, consulate representatives arrived. The same female staff member who had previously received her approached Patricia's bedside with no excess emotion. She explained that the hospital had notified them of Patricia's critical condition and inability to pay medical fees. Out of humanitarian concern, they had negotiated with the hospital to advance payment for her treatment. Hope flickered in Patricia's eyes as she saw government support. However, the staff member's next words plunged her into despair. The advanced payment represented emergency assistance loans for overseas citizens that required legal repayment after returning home. Given that Patricia had no relatives' income source or proof of stable residence in Australia, immigration authorities had decided to deport her. They had arranged placement on the next available flight to Los Angeles that afternoon. Deportation, return home. Patricia was completely stunned. She had not come as a tourist but to get rich and capture me. How could she return empty-handed? Returning without anything would mean facing Robert, confronting their debts, and seeing their destroyed home. She threw off her blanket attempting to leave bed but was restrained by two large hospital security guards. She began making a scene, crying hysterically and using the most vulgar language to curse me, the consulate staff, and the world she perceived as unjust. The staff member observed her coldly. She informed Patricia that Sky Blake was a permanent resident protected under Australian law, that my property represented legitimate private assets, and that her accusations were groundless. Furthermore, Patricia's current hospital behavior was seriously disrupting public order. Continued non-cooperation would require police intervention. The mention of police silenced Patricia's tantrum immediately. She was terrified. She was merely a domineering local shrew who became powerless when facing foreign law and police authority. Finally, like a dog with its spine removed, she was escorted by two security guards to an airport-bound vehicle. Outside the car window, Sydney sunshine remained brilliant. Skyscrapers, harbour bridges and opera house architecture that she had initially fantasized about owning and conquering now mocked her mercilessly. During takeoff, she watched the increasingly distant blue ocean below. She knew she would never again set foot on this continent. 80 million Australian dollars remained a magnificent yet vicious dream. She had come, seen, and gone mad. Then been kicked out with nothing but injuries, humiliation, and 8,000 Australian dollars in new debt. As Patricia boarded her flight back to Los Angeles, Robert sat on a bench in the hallway of the Los Angeles Mental Health Center. He held a diagnostic certificate that felt light as paper yet heavy as a mountain. The diagnosis section clearly stated, acute stress-related mental disorder with severe violent tendencies. Patient name, Joshua Blake. The day before, after my uncle's devastating phone call, Joshua had completely collapsed. He first sat motionless, repeatedly muttering 80 million, 80 million. It was all mine, then suddenly jumped up like a maddened beast. His eyes turned blood red as he pushed Robert aside and charged through their already ruined home. Using his hands, head, and entire body, he began striking walls. He lifted television debris over his head and smashed it against the floor. He tore cotton stuffing from destroyed furniture and stuffed it into his mouth, chewing frantically. He screamed that everyone wanted to steal his money, calling me a thief who had stolen his $80 million. Robert was terrified. In 50 years of life, he had never witnessed such a scene. When he tried to restrain Joshua, his son bit his arm savagely, drawing blood. Neighbors hearing the horrific commotion called police. Officers breaking down the door discovered a hellish scene. A disheveled young man with insane eyes. An old man collapsed on the floor with bloody arms. A space that could no longer be called a home. When Joshua saw uniformed police rather than showing fear, he became even more agitated. He roared that police were also trying to steal his money, brandishing a broken table leg as he charged at them. 4 officers working together finally subdued him. He was strapped to a stretcher and carried downstairs while continuing to curse, struggle, and spit at watching neighbors. Everyone in the building witnessed this spectacle. The family's pampered, precious son had gone completely insane. Robert received basic medical treatment for his wounds, then was summoned to the police station for questioning. Finally, he received a call from the psychiatric hospital. Sitting on that cold bench staring at the diagnosis, his hair had turned half grey overnight. A doctor emerged from an office and patted Robert's shoulder. He explained that the patient's condition was very serious. Excessive trauma had caused cognitive system collapse requiring immediate hospitalization and mandatory treatment. When Robert asked if Joshua could recover, the doctor shook his head uncertainly. Recovery could take months or might never occur. Treatment costs would be substantial, and family members needed to prepare mentally. Treatment costs more money. Robert's head buzzed and he fainted on the spot. I closed my computer, watching the final data stream about daily expense records for a patient at Los Angeles Mental Health Center. I pressed the delete key. A confirmation window appeared asking whether to permanently delete the surveillance system and all its data. I clicked yes. The screen flickered and returned to a clean desktop. The Gold Coast landscape photograph still showed brilliant sunshine. The system I had personally constructed to observe every corner of that other world, the tool that had witnessed perfect revenge, vanished into nothingness in that moment. Like a tombstone built of code and data that I had personally demolished. I lifted a cup of hot tea and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing at a world washed clean by rain. My doctoral thesis proposal had passed defense the previous week. Professor Linus was extremely satisfied with my research direction, believing it could revolutionize risk assessment models throughout the venture capital field. I had used a small portion of my funds to register my own investment company. David became my first partner as we secured 2 highly promising startup technology projects. My life was proceeding along the trajectory I had designed, smoothly and rapidly forward. Peaceful, fulfilling, and full of infinite possibilities. My phone buzzed with a new email. The sender was my uncle, using the only one-way contact method I had left for him. The message was lengthy. He informed me that Robert had disappeared completely, vanishing like vapor, with some claiming to have seen someone resembling him among homeless people under highway overpasses. He told me Patricia now survived by collecting garbage and occasional black market work, barely maintaining subsistence. She told everyone about her daughter who had become wealthy in Australia, but no one believed her ravings. He reported that Joshua's condition fluctuated unpredictably, with treatment costs becoming a bottomless pit. The hospital had issued multiple payment notices. The message concluded with my uncle writing that he understood my actions had justification, since they owed me debts that could never be repaid in this lifetime. He did not ask for forgiveness on their behalf, only that I release myself from the past and begin my new life. I deserved the very best. I stared at this email for a long time without responding. Forgiveness? No, I had never considered those two words. They and I had long ago ceased being the same species. Would you forgive an ant that once bit you but which you had now stepped on? Number you would simply wipe the mud from your shoe and continue walking. I opened online banking and located an account I had established long ago. The account name belonged to my uncle. Years earlier, when Patricia had beaten me and locked me in my room, he had secretly passed 2 meat buns through my window. He had also told me not to blame my mother for her temperament, assuring me that I was not wrong and that education was valuable, encouraging me to continue studying. 2 meat buns. One phrase, "You are not wrong." This tiny warmth represented the only family affection I had ever experienced in that cold household. I entered a figure, 1 million Australian dollars. In the message field I wrote only, "Uncle, this pays for the buns. Take care of yourself and aunt." I clicked transfer. As I pressed the confirmation button, I felt the final thin thread connecting me to the past snap cleanly. All debts, whether hatred or love, whether obligation or gratitude, were completely settled in that moment. We were even. The rain had stopped. A brilliant rainbow arced across the city sky. The ocean surface sparkled like an enormous sapphire under post-rain sunshine. David called me. He mentioned a charity gala that evening attended by Australia's political and business leaders. He had obtained an invitation and asked if I was interested. I walked onto the terrace and breathed deeply of fresh post-rain air. That air carried the scent of sea salt, flowers and grass, and sunshine. It no longer contained the rotten, desperate odor of that 6-square-meter room. I smiled into the phone, agreeing to attend. It was my first genuine, relaxed smile since arriving in this country. Not mocking laughter at enemies or cold satisfaction in victory, but the most sincere smile a 24-year-old woman could offer to her brilliant future. I knew that from this moment forward I was no longer someone living in hatred. I was simply Sky. Someone who had melted away all the past, washed clean all dust, and under sunshine was free, independent, and sparkling with her own light. That is the story for today. Hope you enjoyed this incredible story. Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. Subscribe for more captivating stories like this. And don't forget to like and share this video. Thank you for being here. See you next time.